Cory, you see just another debacle on the border between Turkey and Greece. The UN Refugee Agency says there's about 20,000 migrants amassed across this 200-kilometre wide border. I use the word deliberately migrants. I believe most of them are probably economic refugees, as has been declared in the past. Economic refugees, not refugees in the true sense of the UN declaration. But interestingly, I'm watching all of this play out, the same brinkmanship we've seen in the past, and I bet you there is not one person left in the United Kingdom saying, gee, Brexit, I reckon we got that wrong. Yeah, we should be part of Europe. We should have them flooding through our borders. I bet you they are glad they voted to get their country back.
Peter, I suspect you're right. And won't it be interesting to look at the grabs from a year or so ago for all those people the Ramonas, and who will change their tune. But I agree with you too that these are not economic these are not migrants, these are economic refugees, but they're more than that. I think Erdogan in Turkey is trying to put pressure on the European Union to say, you better treat me a bit better, because otherwise we're going to open these borders, and they're pushing it. So they're unarmed invaders in some respects, because it's done for political purposes, and I think that's very, very dangerous. But it does remind me that perhaps the best decision the EU ever made was not allowing Turkey to become part of that Commonwealth of Nations, or whatever they call themselves over there.
Yeah, look, and I agree with you on Erdogan. I sat in a meeting one time, the Prime Minister and Erdogan had a long discussion. There was me and what could only be described as a thug in the other side of the room, and I tell you what, that's not Erdogan, that was his minder. But Erdogan had a real sinister edge, so I wouldn't put it past him to be using this for a bit of pressure. James, I want to move on to Hezbollah, because we know Peter Dutton's due to be briefed by security agencies in April over whether or not Australia bans Hezbollah in the truest sense of the word, right across the board, like a number of our allies have. I was surprised when I read, there's been a number of stories in the paper about this, that we only had a limited expulsion or prohibition against Hezbollah. I think it pertains mainly just to the military wing. I thought they had been banned whole as bowlers, but that's not the case.
Yeah, no, that's not the case, and that creates an awful lot of problems for us, not the least of which is with dealing with people who've been charged with terrorism or been released from prison or are due to be released from prison on terror offences. If they're supporters of Hezbollah, well, we can't actually do anything about them in terms of extra prohibitions or keeping them in prison or things like that, because at the moment the organisation is not a prescribed outfit, and they play, of course, this double game. Oh, we're involved with government in Lebanon, we're involved with charitable relief, but they are also a terrorist agency that has committed terrorist atrocities around the world for decades, and this is just a real gap in the law that just needs to be fixed, and I think fixed pretty urgently, right along the lines with the UK, the US, and a number of other very close allies who've already done the same thing and done the same thing for years.
Well, Cory Bernardi, unrelated, yes, please.
I was just going to say, it's the same thing with Hamas. The military brigades are banned, but of course Hamas itself is not, even though they fund the military brigades, and international charities funnel money to these organisations. So it is a complex issue, but it should be very simple from Australia's point of view. We don't want any part of it.
Well then, let's move on to Afghanistan too briefly, Cory, because I'll have to go in a minute. But when we were all sitting down with a deal with the Taliban, and as Jim Molan said, the Taliban were sitting down to sign a truce deal, wasn't any way different than the Taliban that he and others went into fight nearly 2 decades ago. You've got to hope that if there's going to be a deal, and it's off the table at the moment, they're trying desperately to get it back on the table, but if we're going to have a deal with someone like the Taliban, you'd want to hope it's going to hold, and that Afghanistan's not going to revert back to the terrorist haven it has been for such a long time.
Peter, I'm all for getting our troops out of Afghanistan, but doing a deal with the Taliban is like feeding your mates to the crocodiles hoping he'll eat you last, or he'll be too full before he comes to get you. This is not a long-term solution, and in fact, appeasement of any enemy of the West is, I think, fraught with danger.
Yeah, it's terrible, I think. James Morrow, Cory Bernardi, thank you very much for your time.